Welcome back to Cookie Pocket. This podcast is about film, episode 33. And today we are going to be talking about Suspiria from 1977, a classic of Italian horror. Now, this movie has a really simple plot. Essentially, in it, a character named Susie Banyan, played by Jessica Harper, is invited to attend this prestigious dance school. So she moves overseas to the dance school and soon starts to suspect that there are some suspicious goings-on and that the school might actually be run by a coven of witches. So as usual, why don't we start with our overall opinions? I know there are some very heated thoughts on this film. So what did you guys think of the movie?
Christian can go first.
Oh wow, throwing him right under the bus.
Okay, I don't know if this is a good idea.
Before
I start, Zach, I just want to make it abundantly clear that my thoughts aren't heated at all. In fact, I feel very cool and dispassionate about this work, generally speaking. But let's see. I'm gonna go straight to my letterbox because I'm worried I'll turn into a ramble if I don't.
As he looks that up,
read it verbatim.
I would like to point out that Christian did threaten to quit the podcast if I continue to suggest Italian horror movies.
This is not true.
But...
This is not true.
We have textual evidence.
No, okay, fine. Give him the textual evidence. It was made in a humorous context, and I will not be taken out of context live on air like this.
I believe you got...
May I share my thoughts, Zach? Is that okay?
If you've got your letterboxd up, yes, absolutely.
I sure do.
Christian Gate.
There's no denying that this is generally beautifully shot and lit quite nicely, but that's where the list of positives ends for me. Embarrassingly awful acting and dubbing, empty characters with no development or reason for investment, a frustratingly repetitive and randomly used score, and a horrible pace characterizes this messy effort more than any well-lit shot can redeem it. This felt like it was 3 hours long despite being half that time. That kind of sums it up for me. I wanted to give it an honest try, and I did, and I got basically nothing from it. I gave it a 1.5 out of 5, and while I would say I did not really enjoy it at all, I will admit that it was marginally better than Zombie 2.
Which we'll talk about.
Beautiful. Okay, I did like this film. I liked it, and that does not mean that it was very good, evidently. I really liked the style and the colors and the general aesthetic, the gothic kind of feel. The otherworldliness is very apparent and constantly in your face. Even when the sequences are in the daytime, it still feels like it's in a dusty old place with a lot of haunting things behind it, which is generally quite hard to convey, especially in today's horror. I can't really recall any films that do it as well as this does that have come out recently, I guess. But I really liked. I don't know. I really liked the simple plot, except for the fact that it was portrayed so awfully and through very uninteresting characters. And I thought that it could have worked, but it's just the dialogue was so weak, and the score was so repetitive, and the dubbing was so distracting that all those things combined were constantly in my face and distracting me from the aesthetic. So I gave it a 2.5 out of 5, and there are some really good scenes and good kills, and the gore is very, very good and very memorable. But outside of that, honestly, I didn't really think it was that good. So, but I still liked it by the end. I still was attached to the aesthetic throughout the entire time, and there were some really tense moments that really stuck out to me. So, yep.
Yeah. Okay. So what I'll say for this movie, I'll extend an olive branch here and say that Italian horror is definitely not for everybody. And it's a big curve to get into Italian horror because it's rendered in a stylistic language so foreign to anything that we're generally used to with Hollywood films. When I first started getting into Italian horror, I had many of the same stumbling block issues. The dialogue is so awkwardly dubbed. This story is so unusually paced. Once you've kind of immersed yourself in the genre, you sort of start to see the method to the madness, and I think the dots connect a lot better. When I first saw this movie, I only gave it like a 2 or a 3. Now that I'm watching it for a second time with a lot more experience in this genre and in this kind of filmmaking, I really, really enjoyed it. I gave this a 4 out of 5 on my second watch, even though I expected to I fully expected not to enjoy this as much. I expected my rating to go down, but instead it went up. I think, like we've all pointed to, I think it looks absolutely gorgeous. I think it's directed impeccably. Every single frame of this movie is laid out so deliberately and perfectly in a way that I, as a filmmaker, I can't help but appreciate that. I really like the score. I will say the dialogue is extremely distracting, as it is in a lot of Italian films. We will talk about that. But personally for me, this is a 4 out of 5. I really enjoy it. Probably not my favorite Argento, but it is getting up there. So, Christian, you mentioned Zombie 2. I'll explain for our listeners. About a year ago, I tried to introduce these guys. Well, I did. I did introduce Mitchell and Christian to Italian horror. Yeah, just as a bit of fun, because believe it or not, we do get together outside of the podcast to watch movies, just for a laugh. And I decided to show them Zombie 2, which is a film by Lucio Fulci, who, next to Dario Argento, the director of this movie, is probably one of the best-known Italian horror directors, at least in America. And Christian absolutely loathed the film. I think, Mitchell, you were kind of lukewarm on it, sort of interested, maybe. But how do we think this movie compares to Zombie 2? And do you think there's any connective tissue between the two that influences your opinions on both?
I'll go first.
Okay.
I think the creativity of the actual deaths, which, I mean, I think the deaths are pretty important. I feel like when you're finally hitting the peak of whatever moment you're trying to portray, I feel like the deaths are like the mini climaxes, and I feel like the deaths are frequent and paced out enough and different enough in Zombie 2 where I feel like they work really well, and I feel like the zombies feel like a genuinely oppressive force. Same way the witches kind of feel that way as well. Mainly towards the end, as we find out, spoilers, who the actual antagonists are. And beyond that, I feel like this is a lot more focused on atmosphere rather than kind of like a progression of events where as the story builds up, we start to learn more things. I feel like that is more of a linear playing field on Zombie 2 than it is with this. I feel like it's a lot more exponential, I guess. If you're using big brain math, this is the only thing I remember from high school.
Parabola.
Yeah. So you don't really learn the major plot points, the actual important background, until the very last half hour of Suspiria. So yeah, I feel like it's a different kind of thing. I definitely acknowledge there's a difference, but I feel like the general cheapness of the dialogue and the crappy acting is very similar in a lot of ways. So maybe there's more bad similarities than there are good similarities, but I feel like the good things are separate. I feel like they're more about the direction, I think, is really what the differences come from. So
yeah, I agree quite a bit with Mitchell, actually. I would even go so far as to agree with what you said about the variety of the kills in Zombie 2. I think that's probably the one thing that movie had going for it. For me, at least. I did think those were very much it never felt like a low-effort slasher, at least not in that regard, because the kills were varied. But oh gosh, I don't know, Zach. It's just every time you explain Italian horror to me, it's like you're asking me to get used to things that are consistently bad and to accept them as mere style decisions. And
See,
I
they're
just
bad.
don't see them as that at all.
They're bad by our Western definition of what should be in a movie. Italian cinema defines things entirely differently, but I fully see what you're saying. I know it's a big curve.
this is crazy.
Well, yeah, and your response tells me that if I were to go down this road more, we would get into our muddle of subjective versus objective, which never goes anywhere, and we just end up angry at each other.
Yeah.
But I will just say then, from my point of view, I don't think terrible dubbing and bad acting and a bad pace to me, or what's at best I think an illogical pace, I don't think I can just accept those being major factors that they are in pretty much every other film that I would ever watch. I don't think I can just accept those as being consistently very, very different, or just bad, as I like to perceive it.
Stupid 1 out of 5.
I can't wrap my brain around it, Zach, because I'm gonna quote someone else on Letterboxd. They listed like all these other things, and they're like, it's got pretty cool atmospheric music, and it uses color well. That's considered a masterpiece. Did I miss something? And that's exactly how I felt by the end of this movie. Because I could see that it was shot well, honestly. Like, I thought the cinematography was impressive, but I don't know, Zach. I really want to meet you in the middle, but I just can't, because I feel these things are aggressively bad, and I just can't get around it.
I don't feel like style stands on its own to make the entire film good. I don't think that if it's stylistically filmed perfectly and everything looks amazing and the shots are so deliberate, like you had said, which is entirely true in my opinion, I don't think that stands on its own to support the entire film as a cohesive model for the rest of films. I think that for style-wise, there's a lot that you can get from this, but beyond that, I really don't see how this is valuable for anything else. Like, the plot is not super original. It's not like, and maybe that was deliberate, but if it doesn't work, then there's nothing else I can do about it.
Okay. So before we move on, what I'll say in regards to Zombie 2 is that Lucio Fulci and Dario Argento, they're the two kind of best-known Italian horror directors, but in terms of filmmaking style, they are entirely different. Lucio Fulci, what I'll say for his movies is that he makes really trashy movies that almost feel like they're interesting in spite of themselves, or they're interesting on accident. There are a lot of really bad aspects of Zombie 2, but it's still a movie that I find really magnetic and really fascinating in places because of its direction and its style and its themes and its ideas. It's just a movie that I'm drawn to somehow, and I think that's the case for a lot of Italian horror. That's a movie I give a 4 out of 5 because I find it just so entertaining every time I watch it. Suspiria is a movie I give a 4 out of 5 because I think in terms of, on like a cinematic production level, I think this is a fantastically made movie. I think Argento is a much better and much more deliberate director than Lucio Fulci. I think he knows what he's doing a lot more than Lucio Fulci most of the time. And for that, I give this a 4 out of 5 on a qualitative level, rather than kind of a much more subjective, I enjoy this type level for Zombie 2. But since we're talking about sort of aspects of production, specifically sound, let's talk about the sound in this movie. We've talked about the dubbing, we've talked about the dialogue, we've kind of hinted on the score. What did you guys think of the sound mix here? And specifically, what did you think of the score by Goblin? The prog rock group Goblin does the score for this movie. They did a lot of other scores for Dario Argento throughout his career. So what did you guys think of that? And we can touch on the dialogue as well. How do you think the sound affects your experience here?
There's a very brief moment in the beginning where I had to get used to it because it felt like a lot of obnoxious nothingness screaming in my ears. And then I found out that was kind of the point. But it was controlled. It was controlled, intentional chaos in my ears. Mm-hmm. So I actually respect that level of consideration for the sound. And I feel like I don't agree with the creative decision to have sudden cuts away from the music for tense moments just to build up another tense moment to the same music. I don't feel like that's effective. Maybe I'm not used to the Italian way of doing things out here in the wild, wild west, but
well, there are some wild, wild west Italian movies too, but
yes. I like the score kind of mixing with different natural sounds occasionally. I feel like that works really well towards the end when she finds out about the witches wanting her gone, and the whole blind man sequence I think that's probably like the scariest sequence for me, honestly, because there's so many different shots there, and you feel like there has to be something there, but there isn't. There's a lot of different shadows, and there's the bird perspective, and the spontaneity there I feel like really works in that specific instance, and I really feel like that for a lot of different points as well, with the bat and things like that. I feel like the sudden shock of the sounds are effective. But from a holistic standpoint, like looking at the entire film as cohesive scenes where there's a consistent effectiveness with the sound and the score, I feel like it started to fade towards the end. Just hearing that same sound was kind of getting distracting. And I know it was supposed to be like I'm supposed to still be immersed in this, sound every 5 minutes, but to me it was a little bit too much. But overall, I did appreciate it. I really did like the natural sounds, especially the loud sequences. I thought they worked most of the time.
Okay.
I pretty much agree. I don't think the music is bad in a vacuum, like if I were to just listen to it as a song. But I also completely agree with Mitchell. I think that it was used in kind of a bizarre manner, and it became less effective every time I heard it, I guess. And I disagreed with how and why it cut away, and I know this was a sound question, but a lot of the times when something quote unquote scary was happening, I didn't know I was supposed to be afraid until this really loud music started playing in my ears, and that was like, I guess, telling me what I was supposed to feel, because everything else that was happening on the screen was not capable of making me feel that, I guess. I don't know, Zach. The music is fine, but I did not like how it was used here. And also, sound editing and sound mixing, I found it to be like kind of distracting, and I don't know if that's just the awkward dubbing in play, but I felt like the sound in general just, I couldn't tell you why, but something felt a little bit off in terms of mixing or whatever.
Yeah. So, okay. So I think I know why that might be. So basically, the standard in Italian film at the time for sound recording was they would cast a big international cast of performers. So there are actors in this movie from France, from Germany, from Italy, from England, from America, and then on set, this is what they did in basically every Italian film at the time. Everybody just says their lines in their native language, and no dialogue is recorded on set. And then you go back in post and you dub everything depending upon which version you're creating. So you can create a fully dubbed Italian version, a fully dubbed English version, and I don't know why. Maybe it was just so that you could make the international versions easier, but I will fully cede that it's awful. It's a huge stumbling block to get over in basically every Italian film from like the 60s through the 80s, possibly even later than that. Some films are still made like that in Italy because it's really awkward. In a lot of cases, actors aren't dubbed. In a lot of cases, actors are dubbed by an entirely different person. And a lot of actors are just, they're not good at ADR and they're not good at dubbing. So it makes them seem like a bad actor because they've got to try to awkwardly sync up with what they were doing on set and try to remember what they were doing, even though like they have no recording to reference. It's a really awkward standard for the time, and I will fully admit that the dubbing and a lot of dialogue in this is awful because of it. In terms of score, though, I really like this score. I think I find the score really immersive. I like a lot of Italian horror music, though, but like this especially, like I listen to this all the time when I'm writing a script or just doing homework or studying, because it really, I think it draws you into this entirely unique auditory world almost. So Argento said that a lot of his big references for this were fairy tales. He wanted Suspiria to feel like Alice in Wonderland, Snow White, Little Red Riding Hood, and I think the musical themes reflect that. The sort of twinkling witch motif. I really like that, and I think that feels very Hansel and Gretel, very very fairy tale to me, and I think it draws you into that kind of a world. Now I can understand how some of the cutting from that could be effective, but for me at least, it totally works. Now, something we also nodded to extensively at this point was style, the style, the color of the lighting and whatnot. So I'd like to talk about that a little bit more, at least. Do you think the style of this movie distracts from the narrative? Do you think it's an additive? Do you think it helps with the experience? Or do you think it kind of smothers the film, like with something like Bram Stoker's Dracula, which we talked about a week or two ago?
I think the film is the style, and the style is the film.
Yeah.
Mitchell Bardsley, 2021.
Confucius.
Yeah, Confucius. That's it.
That
You can go, Christian.
Okay.
Oh no! Don't give me this much floor. Not on this film.
Yes, sir.
I pretty much agree. I will be very forward with you, Zach. The reason I didn't give this a 1 or even a half star was it was lit and shot nicely. The one moment that I found genuinely frightening was towards the end when the one girl's corpse came out of the closet or whatever.
Okay.
And so that was like, okay, this ending could suck more than it currently does. And what was the third one? That it was better than Zombie 2. So those are the 3 reasons that I gave this 1.5 instead of 1 star. But it also frustrated me to no end that this was so beautifully lit and beautifully shot for nothing, because I really felt no connection to any other part of this. I didn't think it smothered the story because I didn't think there was much of a story to smother to begin with. Even though it was simplistic, I had a hard time following it. So it had the double whammy to me of both not being interesting and not being easy to follow. And so from that point, I guess you could say the visuals were really the only thing I ever took away from it. So I don't know that I would call that smothering so much as just outplaying everything else.
Yeah, I was able to follow the story fine.
Okay.
I didn't really have too many problems with following it. I just felt like there was a lot of cushioning, and I don't know. I felt like scenes were dragged out purposefully for the sake of style. And like Christian had said, it's not necessarily because the story was smothered by the style. I just feel like they had like okay, we got something to say here. Now how are we going to make it look really good? They spent like 90% of their time trying to make it look really good and sound really good and be tense through that instead of just having, the other parts we've already mentioned.
Okay, I mean, I will say I think there's more to this than style. I think a lot of it is style, and a lot of the time I would deride a film for being style over substance, but here for me it works because it is going for such a simple fairy tale style narrative. But I know you guys have really gotten down on the actors. I really like some of the performances in this. Now, again, dialogue sounds awful, and it really subtracts from the performances. But like our lead, Jessica Harper, I think she gives a great facial performance. She has just such fascinating features, and she can just raise an eyebrow or like move her mouth in a slight way, and you're drawn into that close-up and into that moment. I love, there's a scene where she's walking down one of the hallways, and there's a woman polishing like a golden pyramid in the hallway, and it glows and it casts a queasy spell upon her. And I think she gives such a great facial performance in that moment, where she's like curious and then afraid and then woozy. I think it's almost like mime, where you follow it entirely based on the visuals of the moment rather than any sound that happens to be made in the moment. There's a dance instructor at the academy who's like constantly wearing this like rictus grin, which feels like a deliberate choice to me, and I think it's effective in making you kind of feel off about that character. I will agree with you, Christian. I don't think this movie is ever really all that frightening. I don't really think it's trying to be. I think it's trying to be that kind of Hansel and Gretel, because, all right, hear me out here. There are weird things that happen in Grimm's fairy tales that aren't really meant to be frightening. They're meant to be cautionary and weird. Like, the prince getting his eyes plucked out in Rapunzel, I don't think is meant to be scary. I think it's meant to be morbid. And I think this movie is meant to be morbid more than it's meant to be frightening. Yes, the American poster has a stupid tagline. The only thing more frightening than the last 9 minutes of this movie are the first 71, which is an awful tagline put out by a studio that I don't think understood the movie. But in terms of style, going back to the question, I really love this movie. For one thing, it's shot on anamorphic lenses, and I am a sucker for a good anamorphic shot. And Dario Argento really knows how to use the anamorphic lens. I don't know if you guys noticed it, but there's a shot towards the end where Susie is she's in the headmistress office, and she's looking for the irises, and the room almost seems to be like turning. And that's because they've used a wide-angle anamorphic lens, and they're spinning the camera, and it creates this really disorienting effect. And that's entirely because of Argento's direction and him knowing what's happening, and him knowing what he wants. Even actors said, like, it was a quick shoot because he knew exactly what he wanted from every shot. This was also one of the very last movies to ever be shot in Technicolor, because Argento said he wanted it to look like Disney's Snow White. He wanted those, like, really bright Technicolor colors. And I think they pop. I think that's another thing that helps it feel like a classic fairy tale Never Never Land style story. I think the style is a big part of executing that. No, I can see that I'm losing you guys, especially Christian. Christian seems to like he wants to take a nap right now. So, do we have any final thoughts before we move on with our discussion?
I'm glad I know my primary colors. That's okay. Like she's like shaking her awake, and there's a green light on her hair. And
Yeah.
like, that's like oozing with style, Zach. There's so much style. Okay.
Yeah, I will.
And I'll tell you what, anamorphic lenses and spinning rooms do not make me want to give it more than a 2.5. Okay.
Okay.
I will fully admit that. Okay. Otherwise, I like the story though. Like it's not like I don't like the story. And honestly, I agree with what you'd said about the actors. I think there's some really good scenes with the actors. The only problem is that I keep seeing the actors act, and I keep seeing the plot unravel amongst all of these stylistic choices. And there's too many of them, Zach.
Okay, all right.
So but I did find myself liking it, and I especially liked how tense the ending was, and how crazy and I guess unexpected it was. So, there's some really good qualities in this, and I feel like there's a lot of other films that could really learn from it. But ultimately, I don't think it really held up cohesively for me. So.
Okay.
Okay, I do have final thoughts, Zach. I have 3 final thoughts.
Oh no.
First
Rule
final
of
thought.
threes.
I like pizza. I like pasta. I like Frank Sinatra. I do not like Italian horror, and I don't think I ever will.
That's
Second
4
thought.
things.
I recently watched Good Will Hunting, and in it, spoiler alert, there's a somewhat climactic scene in which Will is talking to Ben Affleck's character, and he's mad because Will won't use his smarts to do something more. And Ben Affleck's character says, "One day I'm going to wake up and I'll be 50. If one day I wake up 50 years old and you have succeeded in forcing me to watch more Italian horror films, I will have wasted my life. I will. I will have wasted hours of my life at least, and I will be very disappointed in myself." What was my last comment? Okay, yes. Earlier you said, this may not be an exact quote, but you said something along the lines of, normally I would deride a film for being more style above substance, but I think it works here because it's going for a fairy tale type feel. I am going to quote you, word for word, what you said in that segment of this podcast, if and when we discuss the Star Wars prequels on this show, if ever.
Whoa.
And that's all I have to say about this. 1.5 out of 5. That's how I feel.
Okay, so what I'll say, first off, if one day you wake up and you're 50 and you've watched more Italian horror, maybe you've wasted your life, but I haven't wasted mine. Another point.
He's kind of got you there.
This is the first part in a trilogy by the same director, so maybe I'm getting ideas for future seasons.
Dare. No.
And to be more serious, though, my actual final thoughts. I think it's quite possible that I appreciate this movie more, or I get more out of this movie because I make short films and movies. I think as somebody who directs and somebody who's very invested in style, it's possible that I see the style in this movie and I gravitate more towards that than somebody who's maybe looking for a narrative or a more traditional film. I enjoy the style in this film, as evidenced by my kind of borrowing from it in a music video that I recently shot at the very end of that music video. But I really appreciate it. I think that if you're somebody who's interested in Italian horror, this is a good place to start. It's not my favorite Italian horror. My favorite Italian horror is probably Phenomena by the same director, which maybe we'll watch that on the show someday as well. But it's a good movie to start with. I really like it. I think maybe Christian will come to appreciate it eventually if I can wear him down enough. No. It's a 4 out of 5 from me. Now, as Christian rolls in his grave, let's move on to Week in Review. Now, for those of you who haven't been with us since the start of Season 2, this is a new segment we've added where we basically take turns discussing any form of media that we've consumed since the last episode that we recorded. So, it's a new episode. What do you guys have to talk about?
Oh, I guess
Christian, go.
Oh, heck. Sorry, Mitchell. I read more of Dracula, but I still haven't finished. I'm like just under 200 pages in, but it is very interesting, and sort of to co-opt our past discussion on Dracula, I've based on what I've read, I've grown to appreciate Hopkins' Van Helsing a little bit more, because I do think there's a little bit of that eccentricity and like somewhat awkward jokes and whatever portrayed in the text, and there are more instances of drawing blood for Lucy. That's sort of like a prolonged, reoccurring thing in the book, and what I'm trying to say is I got something of a new lease on Van Helsing in my continued reading, and it has improved my outlook more than it has brought down my outlook on both Hopkins' performance and Coppola's film as a whole.
Okay.
I prefer Hugh Jackman as Van Helsing.
Oh, no.
After you've seen Anthony Hopkins in Silence of the Lambs, he doesn't deserve to be in anything else. It's only that. Keep him there, okay?
Okay.
He is Hannibal Lecter for the end of time, right next to Mads. But I watched The Final Year, and I'm about to pull off the biggest 4D chess outstanding move you've ever seen, where I don't even need the spin team and I can talk about modern politics.
Oh, wow. I'm going to have him ready.
The Final Year came out in 2017, directed by Greg Barker. It follows Barack Obama's foreign policy team. Christian, you didn't know I watched this?
No, isn't Greg Barker the director of Sergio?
Quite possibly.
Yo, let's go.
He is primarily a documentary director, so maybe.
He did a much better job with this anyway. But basically it follows the foreign policy team of Obama. So John Kerry, Samantha Power, Susan Rice, and Ben Rhodes. And it is actually very neutral, and I don't understand why people are calling this propaganda. Frankly, I don't really know how it is like totally enlightening everyone on how amazing Obama was, because I don't think it is at all. I feel like there are plenty of moments where you're either like, wow, they made some really good decisions here and it really turned out well, or if you feel like on the other side of the spectrum, you're like, wow, that was really dumb and they acted really stupid in that circumstance. Like, they just made the entire U.S. look ridiculous. And you can fall at any point in that, and that is entirely up to your opinion. And I feel like that's a sign of a really good documentary in a lot of ways. And I feel like it accurately portrayed them very well and showed a lot of aspects of their jobs and of their personalities that a lot of people may have not known about. It may make you sad, too, depending on how you feel about the final year of Obama's presidency. And it actually doesn't portray Obama that often, believe it or not. And, you know, the few times you see him, you're like, yeah, that's Barack Obama. That's President Obama. But I think it did a pretty good job. I do feel like it definitely dragged, and it was very sporadic, and definitely very selective, because it only really portrayed the countries we were saying sorry to instead of countries we are currently having issues with, like Afghanistan and Iran and things like that. It really just went to like Vietnam and Japan. I think the last one was Greece. Nigeria. But yeah, I think it was pretty all right. If you're interested in anything foreign policy related, I feel like it's generally pretty intriguing. There wasn't a whole lot I personally learned about a lot besides their personalities and seeing how things were operating at that time. Because I do feel like the atmosphere was significantly different at that time. And also their reaction to President Trump eventually winning is also very intriguing as well. And kind of leading up to that point, they started to get a lot more worried and things like that. And I feel like that really comes across really well. So yeah, I feel like it was very, I don't feel like it was that politically bent, honestly. And I think I gave it a 3.5 out of 5.
Okay. All right.
Oh, and I will just stop in real quickly. Yes, that man also directed Sergio. So, if you need another Ana de Armas performance in your life, let's be honest, we all do, head on over to Netflix and watch Sergio, and then head on over to season 1 of Cookie Pocket, wherein we discuss that movie.
There we go. Nice spin. I was going to say, we are not sponsored by Greg Barker.
Or the United Nations.
Or the United Nations. Okay, so I have watched and read so much stuff since our last episode. I finished Broadchurch, which I said I would update you guys on. I think I'm going to hold off on that for now, though, because I also watched Bo Burnham Inside on Netflix. which is a quite recently released comedy special, which musician, writer, director, performer, pretty much jack of all trades, Bo Burnham made during lockdown, over the past year during the COVID-19 lockdown. And he made it entirely on his own in a small room. He did all the production, all the lighting, all the cinematography. He directed it, wrote it, produced it, edited it. And on that level, I think it's really amazing. I gave it a 5 out of 5. I think as somebody who works on sets, both corporate sets and film sets, the things he was able to do just entirely on his own show a huge dedication for detail and planning that I think is just incredible. He and also for resourcefulness. He lights things in this occasionally using just his phone or using a headlamp and a disco ball, and it looks amazing. I also mentioned that the songs from this on an album basically is one of the best albums I've ever heard. Not just one of the best comedy albums, one of the best albums. I think the songs are really catchy. In places, they're really introspective and interesting and kind of dark as well. And Bo is also just a hugely magnetic presence on screen or on stage anywhere. He knows how to command an audience either present right in front of him or present digitally. He knows what he's doing. He knows how to hold your attention. So it's a 5 out of 5 for me. It's funny, it's interesting, it's sad, it makes you think. It really examines the relationship between Bo Burnham and his audience from both sides of the perspective. I think it's just great. And if you have Netflix, please do watch this. I know a lot of people are already, but it's totally worth it. And I would not say that it's overrated at all. So that brings us to the end of Week in Review and on to Christian's Magical Cinema Tour. The Magical Cinema Tour has come to take Christian away. That's our jingle for now until we may or may not make one. Christian, what classic media have you watched since our last episode that you'd like to talk about?
Thank you for taking me away. I'm thinking there might be some debate on how classic this is, but I think it should meet the benchmark. Okay. I recently watched George Lucas's directorial debut, Thex 1138,
Great.
or THX 1138 or whatever.
Yeah.
His name is Thex. So, anyway, it's pretty George Lucasy. There's a lot of clunky dialogue, and the plotting kind of takes like 30 minutes maybe to really kick in with the viewer for them to understand what's happening. And George doesn't really care if he leaves you in the dark, and he doesn't feel the need to apologize for less than fluid decisions. And I had to watch the special edition, which unfortunately includes some CGI changes.
Yeah.
But despite all that, I thought it was a really great film. I think this is another example where maybe style matches or exceeds substance, but I think it's called for. It's a very sterile and Orwellian look into the future, and it's certainly gripping. So I think you might find it immensely uncomfortable, but I would be surprised if many people thought it was bad. I'll just say if you're someone who really needs to know what's going on all the time in movies, which apparently I'm at least close to that, this may not be for you because it's pretty ambiguous, but it's sort of it explains a lot about George Lucas and his directorial tendencies if you're a curious Star Wars fan or just a film fan.
Yeah, I'll second that. I consider THX George Lucas's best film, and I'll agree that he kind of almost shuts the viewer out in a way, but I think it works because, like you mentioned, is this Orwellian, sterile future world where kind of clunky dialogue and awkward interaction does work. I love, there's a scene in that where he goes to a store to buy something purely for the experience of buying it and then throws it away, and that's like the whole cultural exercise. I think that's a great little moment that shows that George Lucas is actually a lot smarter and a much better writer than a lot of people think he is. He's just kind of hasn't really had the chance to...
I need that in writing.
He just hasn't really had the chance to express those ideas because so much of his time and effort has been squashed by Star Wars.
I just cut that part out, Christian.
Over the years. But yeah, I totally recommend THX as well. That's, I'd say, a nice sum up, Christian. So with that, time to move on to the rundown, our old perennial favorite segment dating as far back as season 1. What do we got this week, boys?
We have me being disappointed. Mitchell, are you ready?
Oh, wow, that's a depresso. That's a depresso. Am I going to first?
Yes. Let's just
Hey! Okay, I go first.
Okay, 3, 2, 1, go.
Exposition by narration.
3 out of 5.
Terrible acting.
2 out of 5.
Music by Goblin.
4 out of 5.
Terrible dubbing.
Oh, 2 out of 5, yeah.
Using every color of the rainbow.
4 out of 5.
Light.
4 out of 5.
Wolfman arms.
3 out of 5.
Maggots.
3 out of 5.
Good morning, may I help you?
3 out of 5.
Witches.
3 out of 5.
Zach Garrigus' Mark.
Oh, 4 out of 5.
Jumping into a ton of barbed wire like an idiot.
4 out of 5.
Creepy old woman causing hemorrhaging.
4 out of 5.
Blue irises.
3 out of 5.
Abusing a blind man that's not deaf.
3 out of 5.
Best actor going to guide dog.
3 out of 5.
Holding red paint in your mouth.
4 out of 5.
Susie constantly passing out.
3 out of 5.
Thick attack bat.
3 out of 5.
Decorative peacock. 1 second.
3 out of 5.
Finish, finish, die, die. Oh.
I get. Well, we're running out of time. We can't talk.
Anything.
We can't talk about. Yeah. Okay. We'll move on. Our time has come. Mitchell, I'm pretty sure you're hosting next time. So what are we going to be talking about next episode?
We're going to be discussing one of the best comedies ever. Which I guess wouldn't be possible if it weren't for the BBC, I suppose.
Who the man?
It's from Monty Python and the Holy Grail. Came out in 1975. It came out during their hiatus from Flying Circus. And, yeah. If you haven't seen it, I don't know what to tell you. It's on Netflix, so.
Yeah.
Chickadee, check it out.
I totally recommend you check it out. I think everybody owes it to themselves to see Monty Python and the Holy Grail at least once. So join us next time when we discuss Monty Python and the Holy Grail. Until then, arrivederci.
Ciao!